Welcome back into today's video. Going to have a look at the weather for the next 8 to 10 days in today's video, and this one will be taking us up to around the 19th of July, so going into the second half of the month quite easily with this update. It looks like weather's going to be staying pretty mixed really. Could be some quite cool and fairly unsettled weather coming through at times next week, particularly for the north. I don't think there'll be too much rain down in the south. Around a week or so's time, 10 days time, there is just signs that there's another push of heat coming up across France. Now, this one looks like it's probably going to stay across the continent, but we may look at a big temperature contrast around northwestern Europe, somewhere around the 17th, 18th, 19th of July. It needs watching because obviously it could turn us hot if the hot air gets in, but with such a big temperature contrast, it could also turn us potentially quite wet. So we'll have a look at the charts on that in a second. But before we get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on all the pages at gasblues.com. Have a browse with widgets, any articles that you're interested in, please click through. You have to go off and read those articles. Thanks very much for doing that. There's video ads on all the pages. They open out with the content when they close back up again. When you watch them, it's all helping to pay for the website, so thanks for getting involved and doing that. We'll just start with the central England temperature. You will remember that this time last week, taking into account the first day of July, which set that new temperature record at Heathrow for the month, you remember that the central temperature for the first day of July was 24.5 Celsius, around 9 degrees above the 30-year average. Well, in the past week, we've seen a very, very impressive collapse of the central England temperature. You don't see it reducing like this very often. Of course, it started from a very high point from the very first day of the month, but we currently stand at 17.8 provisionally, so we've gone from 24.5 down to 17.8 in a week. That's still a couple of degrees above average, still 2.1 degrees above the long-term average, but that's a huge reduction in temperature to take place over the course of the week. That's probably going to be stemmed over the next day or so, because we're going to have a little bit of warmer weather coming up. But as we go through into next week, I think we're likely to see that reducing once again. So it doesn't look like it's going to be a particularly hot month at this stage, but we'll have a look at the charts in a moment for that period around the 18th, 19th, where we may be seeing signs of hotter air trying to get in once again. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles. These are the set against the 30-year temperature average. You can see that indicated by the thick red line just here. So at the moment we're a bit below average. It was a cool day yesterday, of course. We're going up a little bit above average for the start of the weekend. So as I say, that drop in the central temperature will probably be stemmed a little bit on Friday and Saturday, but then after that we go back down towards the long-term average. And these are the dates just here, starting at the 9th and going through to around the 25th of July. And we can see that certainly for the second half of the weekend into most of next week, the temperatures are going to be around, or maybe even at times a bit below average, so nothing exciting going on with the temperature, certainly up to around the 17th of July, which is just here. Now after that we do see one or two members of the ensemble going back up to sort of hot or very hot levels. So this is the temperature scale just here. That's 20 degrees, 850 HPA. And one or two of the ensemble members are getting up towards that sort of temperature around 18th, 19th of July, just here. They're outliers at the moment. They are not supported by the ensemble mean. The ensemble mean is the white line here. It probably can't make it out that well, but there is a white line that is the ensemble mean, and that sort of is sticking around the 30-year temperature average, to be honest. So those hot members for around the 18th, 19th July, not well supported, but there's the hints there that something could happen very briefly. We might get a push up in the temperatures, but overall a great deal of scatter there, and you wouldn't want to be relying on anything particularly for what may happen in that period. A lot of scatter being indicated by way of the precipitation ensembles. The precipitation spikes. Generally not a great deal going on for the coming few days. They do come back a little bit next week though, so I think there will be some showery rain coming through at times through the course of next week. Not a washout of the week by any means, but some showers coming through. The temperature anomaly going from the 9th of July through to the 17th is coming out cooler than average, not just across the UK, but across most of Northern and Central Europe as well. So I think we are in for a relatively cool week, actually, for much of next week. The CET will continue to reduce. Precipitation anomalies around average, a little bit wetter than average for Scotland, still a little bit drier than average in the south, but most places coming up near normal. So this does imply a little bit more of an unsettled week coming through next week with showery bursts of rain at times. So let's have a look at the generic charts. This is the GFS for Monday, and we've got low pressure coming into the north and the west with high pressure close to the south. So southern parts still mainly dry to start next week, but there will be some rain at times up in the north. All places could get some rain Monday into Tuesday. Remember, winds are going into the northwest, so that's bringing down relatively cool air from the north. As we go through to the middle part of the week, this is Wednesday, a little bit of a ridge down across the south, but low pressure up to the north could still be keeping it showery up there. And sort of hints of generally showery type conditions as we go through into Thursday the 16th of July with relatively cool temperatures as well. Now this little area of low pressure just here out to west of the Bay of Biscay is interesting. Doesn't look like much, but there's some very hot air coming up from Spain and North Africa feeding into that low pressure. Of course, got all this cool air coming down from the north as well. So that low pressure could get invigorated by this temperature contrast. It's just where that low pressure goes. It will be interesting as we go through to the weekend of the 18th, 19th of July. So as we move through to Friday the 17th, we find the low pressure around northern Spain and the Bay of Biscay. Again, very hot air on the southern side of that low pressure with relatively cool air on the northern side. And then that low pressure gradually starts to drift up into the UK as we go through to Saturday the 18th. And by the time you get through to Sunday the 19th, it's actually starting to pull away to the south and the east once again, with this ridge up to the northwest generally staying in control. But it's a close run thing, and I just want to show you the temperature contrast with that low pressure. So you see that it's very, very hot again across Spain and southern parts of France on Friday the 17th. Very cool air is coming down from the north at the time of year. And all of these black lines you see here, they're the different temperature scales. And you see that there is a big, big temperature contrast there close to the UK as we're going into that period of around the 17th, 18th, 19th of July. That's accentuated on Saturday the 18th. So you can see what's going on. The heat is trying to come up from the south and it's fighting against this cool air from the north. Now there's something like, I can't quite see it, but close to some parts of England and northern parts of France, there's something like a 20-degree temperature differential there. So a big, big temperature contrast, and well, it could turn hot, but perhaps the general probability, or the more possible scenario, is that the temperature contrast could fuel some quite heavy rain, maybe even some violent thunderstorms. So we would need to be, or we will need to be, watching out for quite what's going on there around the 17th, 18th, 19th of July. The ECMWF is a lot quieter in comparison, so as we go through next week, we keep that sort of north-south split, with the north getting most settled, the south getting the driest conditions, quite cool and showery around the middle part of next week. And then the high pressure builds through. We keep the winds generally from a northerly flow, so it's quite cool with showers in the north and east, but driest weather in the west. And we finish up on day 10, Sunday the 19th, not with a big temperature contrast and a low pressure close to the country, but just generally with a ridge of high pressure around the UK, keeping it very quiet, and temperatures on the warmish side, but nothing particularly exciting going on. The GEM is very interesting. Finally, we have showery, cool conditions through the middle part of next week, and then there's that area of low pressure that we saw on the GFS with the temperature contrast again, not quite as dramatic as on the GFS, but there is still a big temperature contrast there, with generally cool air across the UK and hot air to the south. The GM shows what could potentially happen with this, because it develops that low pressure into quite an explosive feature actually by Saturday the 18th of July. The central pressure is going down to 995 millibars. That's sort of autumnal level of an area of low pressure. It's a dartboard right over top of the UK, and it's being fueled by the temperature contrast. So you can see, but actually on the GM we stay on the cool side of the air with that low pressure, but because it's so hot to the south and the east of the low, it's sort of fueling the low pressure into quite an intense feature. There will be a lot of heavy rain with that, and of course with tight-packed isobars, unusually windy for the middle of summer as well. Eventually it all clears out the way and it turns cooler. So that period around the 17th, 18th, 19th, Friday, Saturday, Sunday next week, it needs watching. It may come to nothing. The ECM may have this right, and we just say generally fairly quiet with high pressure close to the country and all of the heat, and the low pressure stays to the south. But we do need to watch it, because there's the chance that it could turn very hot, of course, if the low pressure stays out to the north and west. But equally, there's a chance that it could turn very wet with such a big temperature contrast fueling the low pressure. It could develop, it could blow up into quite a significant feature. So that period around the 17th to 19th of July looking quite interesting. Before that though, I think generally we're just looking at sort of coolish, showery conditions through much of next week. Okay, we'll be keeping an eye on all of this, and it's JMA Friday tomorrow, looking ahead for the coming month. That will take us into August. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching.